Hi, I'm Jordan, and I chose Automate This by Christopher Steiner. Um, Christopher Steiner, he's an engineer and the CEO of a tech startup, so he's got a lot of ethos on this topic. Um, and according to the jacket, this is the rousing story of the last gasp of human agency and how today's best and brightest minds are endeavoring to end it. Um, which is a little bit melodramatic, but it does give the overall gist of the book, which is that algorithms are taking over the world because they can do everything better than we can, and basically that the people who are able to create the algorithms are going to be really important in shaping our future. And so, in my opinion, also because he discusses so many tasks that we would have thought of as things that only humans can do, I think it's really sort of prompts the question of what sets us apart from like highly intelligent machines. What is it that actually makes us human, defines us as humans? And through the arguments that he makes, you start to see that maybe things like language, the ability to interpret emotion, and even like the ability to create art might not actually be enough. Um, so going back to his theme of algorithms taking over everything, he runs through some examples like playing the algorithms that can play poker, algorithms can do medical diagnostics, they can be used, NASA has used them to basically screen the personalities of astronauts to figure out, is this group of people going to work well together, and is it a good idea to send them up into a small confined space for a few months together? Are they going to get along well enough? And they are able to use algorithms to predict that actually really accurately. So that's all great, and you might say, well, those are all things you just feed some data in and get some data out, and you're like, great, this makes sense for an algorithm to do. But surely some areas are still safe and still things that like only humans would be able to do. Take art, for example. Well, actually, if you take art, for example, he's got an example of that too, where an algorithm's been made that can basically create music in the style of, in this case, Bach, but pretty much any. It applies for pretty much any composer. So it can take music and basically create its own music in that style. So, sort of the story behind this is there's a music professor, David Pope. He was commissioned to write an opera and was having writer's block. So, he decided to create an algorithm that would generate an opera in his own style, so that he'd have a great work to present to the people who commissioned it. So he found out actually that it was a little bit too complicated to do his own work, so he decided to use Bach pieces because that era had rules that were a little more structured, so it was easier, relatively easier. No way was it easy, but it was easier to program because the rules were more concrete. Yeah, so basically, the way that Cope did this, he writes his algorithm, he feeds it tons and tons of Bach pieces, and then he says, okay, spit me out a piece. And so the algorithm does, and he gets it, and he does this a few times, and then all of the pieces that he gets, like, they're okay, like, the music makes sense, but it's not, like, there's no, like, real creativity or interest in it, and it's just, they're all kind of blah and dull, and he's like, there's just something missing. And so what he actually decides to do is he kind of he adjusts the constraints on how closely the algorithm has to follow the rules it's learned off of the block pieces, and he gives it a little more freedom to sort of make its own choices and deviate from the patterns. And as soon as he does that, he starts getting these really interesting, amazing, like high quality pieces out of the algorithm. And it ends up being so good that professional musicians can't tell the difference between genuine Bach pieces and pieces that this algorithm has written in the style of Bach. And so there's sort of this interesting case that you see of human bias when he tells people, hey, these performers are playing a piece written by an algorithm, the people in the audience say, oh, it's soulless, it's dull, this isn't real music. And then when the people in the audience have no idea that an algorithm like spit out the sheet music to this piece, they say things like, oh, this is amazing, this is true art, I feel like this emotion deep in my soul. And it kind of makes you question, like, if something makes you feel something, doesn't that mean that it's genuine music? Does that mean that it's art, even if a machine did create it? I think it's a good question. And then you could argue, oh, well, his algorithm's just copying Bach pieces. It's not doing anything original. And, I mean, the counter argument to that is ultimately human composition draws on the music from our predecessors. And so every era of music has roots in the era before it. And music kind of revolves around, fundamentally, a lot of music is just creating and then breaking rules, which is just what the algorithm does. So does that mean it's music? I don't know. Does that mean it's art? And I think, yeah. So an interesting objection, sort of what I would argue, is that it's the performers that make the music the art. The algorithm, it turns out pieces that are great, but there's nothing like the algorithm isn't doing it because the algorithm has some vision of a piece to make. The algorithm is doing it because it's like, this is what works. And so one of the sources that I looked at said, what if we think about music not as a set of beautiful artifacts that especially talented people make, but rather as a behavior, something that practically anyone can do. And I think when you think of music from the perspective of like a human behavior, then it calls into question, well, who's making the art? Like, is this art the art of the composer? Is this art the art of the performers? Is it sort of a collaboration between both? I don't know. I think it's interesting. I had a band director once who he'd hold up a sheet of music and say, what is this? And we'd all go, it's music. And he'd say, no, this is not music. This is ink on paper. The music is the stuff that you guys make when you read what's on the paper. So, I don't know. Is the algorithm creating the art? Are the musicians creating the art? Is it both of them together? I don't know, but I think it's an interesting question. But if you combine that idea of a robot creating art, then it kind of breaks this idea that humans are special because of our ability to create art, and it forces you to sort of re-examine this question of what does it mean to be human. So what makes us human and not animals? What sets us apart from just really, really good artificially intelligent machines? So this other article that I read from BBC, they mentioned morality, culture, and cooperation as things that people suggest as uniquely human traits. And they've found a lot of those elements in animals. And so though they may be fundamentally important to us as humans, it doesn't distinguish us. Another thing you could say is, well, language, it's our ability to use language that sets us apart. Well, computers have like programming languages, and it's almost like a way of us communicating with the computers, if you want to think of it like that. One thing that this other article mentioned is our language is special because of our ability to use symbolism and abstraction, which kind of reminds me of the Plato's teapot thing that we talked about, right? I say teapot, maybe you have an image in your head of like a picture of a teapot, or maybe you see someone pouring tea, or maybe if you're really weird, you see a teacup. Yeah, so some people argue it's our ability to think symbolically. But imagine I created this amazing robot and I said, hey, here's my robot, and it thinks and it sees pictures. Does that mean I created a robot that is more human than other robots? I don't know, maybe. Another thing that this BBC article mentioned, Aristotle said that we pursue art and reason for its own sake, and that is what makes us human. And so I think it's interesting to kind of question, like, if you have an artificially intelligent computer, is it doing its task because it was programmed to do that, or is it doing it because it has like a desire to fulfill its its role. And I think if you start to talk about things like desire and wants, that ties into feelings and emotions. And I mean, obviously, right now, it seems kind of silly to think of the idea of like a robot or an algorithm that could feel any human emotion. But suppose one could be created. Um, would people ever even believe that it was possible? If I created a robot and I said, "Hey, this robot has feelings," and it was so convincing, it acted so convincingly like it had feelings, you wouldn't be able to prove me wrong. Like that kind of ties into this like the article we read about falsifiability. I've been making this unfalsifiable claim, but you wouldn't be able to prove me wrong. But I think the interesting thing is if humans can't even accept that an algorithm could write music that could make them feel something, is it really likely that they would ever accept that a robot could have feelings? I would argue probably not. And so, I mean, I don't really have an answer to any of those things, but I think they tie into, these are questions that this book prompts, and I think they tie into our course concepts. We talked about Plato and his teapots. I guess they're not Plato's teapots, but Plato and the teapots. We talked about Popper and falsifiability, and obviously lots of people have been asking what does it mean to be human for a really long time. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this book though. I don't know. It's interesting because the thing he's talking about should be kind of scary. Like algorithms and robots are going to take over everything. They're going to like put us all out of work and do everything better than we are. So why does anything we do even matter? Like it should be scary, but the way he writes it is it's almost very exciting. And you're just like, wow, I can't wait to see like what algorithms will be able to do next. So yeah, I'd 100% recommend this. It's also totally interdisciplinary. He talks about technology, economics, history. The other thing is this like bot revolution could honestly, realistically impact every discipline. And to some extent, it probably already has.